There's nothing quite like Christmas at bringing out the crafty in all of us. Hi there, I'm Jane from Sustain My Craft Habit and welcome back to our channel. Today we're so happy to share with you over 20 easy and festive Dollar Tree Christmas crafts for you to make as gifts, to decorate, or just to get feeling extra festive. So let's get started. For our first Dollar Tree Christmas craft, we're going to use this wooden tray along with a silver pillar candle holder to create an adorable pedestal. I had two of these festive napkins that came, I think, from Dollarama in Canada, but you could use any coordinating napkins for this. I picked the blue napkin with silver snowflakes to match the silver on the pillar, the candle pillar. But obviously, if you have a different base, you can mix and match whatever style you choose. You could also use this technique for making a little raised pedestal for any season. So I started by painting the wood tray with some white acrylic paint. You could use a chalky paint. Again, it's just to provide a nice crisp coat to go underneath the napkin. I love this little trick for separating the plies of the napkin that seem to stick together, but you'll want to just put a little bit of Mod Podge onto the tip of your fingers and then let it dry to the point that it becomes tacky. This takes about 4 or 5 seconds, and once you start to feel that it's sticky, just pinch the corner of the napkin together and then pull your fingers apart and the two sides of the napkin will stick together. If you have more than 2 plies, you'll just want to repeat this again until you just get to that top ply of your napkin. So here I am applying some Mod Podge to the surface of the wood tray, and then we'll let that dry completely to do the iron-on technique. So this is my preferred method of decoupaging because you really have a lot more control without your napkin sticking and tearing and wrinkling. Once the Mod Podge is completely dry, you'll simply place your napkin where you want it to be positioned and then cover it with a little bit of parchment paper. I actually at this point had realized that my iron was not yet hot, so I went ahead and while it was heating up just painted the inside of the tray with that same white acrylic paint. I'm going to be decoupaging a different napkin onto the inside, but again you could do the same one on both sides or even do a crackle finish, any other type of paint technique for the tray itself. Okay, so now that my iron is set, I put a little bit of parchment paper over top, which helps to protect that napkin from ripping, and then simply use the heat from the iron to fuse that napkin into the dried Mod Podge. I just continued all the way around the outer edges, the outsides of my tray, and then used my scissors and a sanding block to take off the excess of the napkin. Lining up those edge pieces just took a little bit of extra care, but it made it easy that the Mod Podge was dry and I could just gently peel it off and place it back down. I love a sanding block like this for these types of tasks. It's really satisfying to sand that bit of tissue paper against the sharp edge of a surface and then it comes right off so nice and clean that I don't even think I could do this with my scissors. I found my sanding block at the paint store, but you can check if they have them at the dollar store, or most home improvement stores will have them as well. Once that napkin was applied to the outside of the tray, I cut out a section of this napkin that says Merry Christmas to decoupage onto the inside of the tray using that same iron-on technique. I sometimes struggle with decoupaging the inside of surfaces because it's hard to get the iron in there into all those grooves or to cut the napkin to size. So sometimes you just have to put a little slit in the corner or cut the excess off and work slowly till you get it in the right position. But this little Merry Christmas wreath fit in there so perfectly after cutting it down to size a bit, and then I just used my iron to press that right in there. It may seem a bit silly to put a napkin on the side where we're just going to be placing things on here. You could also put candies in here, use it as a little dish, but it does just leave a nice finish, and if it is empty then it also will look cute without having anything in there. So either way, it will look really nice, and you can just seal it up with a little bit of more Mod Podge or some of the Duraclear that I like to use for sealing and protecting my surfaces. At this point, I felt that there was a little something missing along the edges of the tray, so I used some Mod Podge and then glued on there a little bit of silver glitter, which just added a bit of sparkle that coordinated with the silver base that we were using. To finish off this craft, I simply glued that tray onto the base using some Gorilla Glue and hot glue to create this beautiful raised pedestal craft. I thought I was being so genius with this craft idea, but then when I showed it to my sister, she's like, I don't get it. So you tell me whether you saw the vision for this Dollar Tree Christmas craft idea. I started by drilling a small hole into the bottom of a wood slice, and this is going to form the base of my craft. I used a little bit of this wire. I think it's about an 18 gauge wire. You're going to need one that's sturdy enough but still bendable, and we're just going to wrap this around. So what I'm aiming for here is to create a little tree with some of the wood beads, and the wood beads that I found were from the Dollar Tree. There was a package that had different sizes of them. I think there was about 35. Starting by stringing the larger beads first, maybe about 5 or 6 of them, and then working towards the smaller ones onto my wire. And the idea here is that they'll loop around. In the end, we'll have a shape that resembles a Christmas tree. Did you know that only a small proportion of the people who watch this video are actually subscribed to our channel? So if you like what you're seeing, please consider hitting that notification and subscribe button. I also made a red one, and that one was using all the same size of beads. So what do you think? Is this tree enough? In the end, I added a little star to the top just so that nobody could be confused, but I thought this was just kind of a fun little festive touch that you could add onto a tiered tray or onto a shelf. You may have spotted this viral craft using Dollar Tree bowls to create beautiful festive luminaries for the holidays, and we're going to show you how we did ours with a rose gold themed color palette. So I started by removing the stickers from the bottom of the bowls. I like to use my heat tool whenever I am struggling with those labels because they often help to release the glue or the adhesive on the back of the sticker, which then makes it really easy to come off of the surface. I next painted the outer surface of the bowl with a white acrylic paint. You could use a white chalky paint as well, but the acrylic is just much cheaper. I didn't have any trouble with it coming off of my bowl. If you're finding that to be an issue, you might want to try a different brand of acrylic paint. The nice thing about the acrylic paint is that it's much cheaper than chalk paint. It's readily available and it comes in a ton of different colors. So while I did a white base for my luminary, you could do red or green or any other color you choose. I used different shapes of bowls for the autumn to create a decorative pumpkin using the similar technique, and for that I had used an orange acrylic paint. So really there's so many different options. After painting that base coat of white and letting it dry, I dry brushed some gold metallic paint over the surface, and you can see that that really helps to bring out all the details in the bowl to show off those features. Now I needed some way to add the lights inside there. I had these twinkle lights that I also picked up from Dollar Tree, and I started by using the tip of my hot glue gun while it was hot to pierce a hole in the bottom of one of the bowls, and it was just large enough to be able to thread those string lights through there so that I wouldn't have to worry about opening or closing it to light up my lantern whenever I wanted to do so. With my string lights in place, I just glued the battery pack to what was going to be the top of my luminary so that I could easily get to it later when I wanted to turn it on and off. And we're going to hide this battery pack in amongst all the florals. So you can see here these beautiful rose and dusty gold pink florals that I found this season at Dollar Tree. I also picked up one of these chocolate brown picks and some light pink ones, and I just really love this color palette. It's a little bit different from the traditional red and green and gold, so I just thought that it would be a fun way to dress up this particular luminary. I created a loopy bow with some pink silk ribbon that I had in my craft collection. I actually realized I didn't have a lot of pretty rose gold ribbons, so I think we'll have to correct that soon. But I did have this one, and I just created that bow and put that right onto the battery pack, and then added in the flowers from the stems all around, alternating the lighter with the darker pink colors. I next layered in some of these longer leafy stems so that they were sort of draping over the sides, as well as the darker eucalyptus to add a little bit of depth and color to the arrangement. I also strung together 3 of these rose gold baubles and hung them in place, and they just added such a nice shine to the piece. Okay, and now that the top part is done, it's time to attach the top bowl to the bottom bowl, and I did that using some Gorilla Glue, which I put all the way around, and then added on a bit of my hot glue just to hold everything together until the Gorilla Glue had a chance to set. It takes usually a couple of hours, but then you get a really nice adhesion and you don't have to worry about your bowls coming apart. I love how this luminary turned out. You could have it out on the porch or indoors. It looks beautiful lit up as well as just throughout the day. Ever since I've incorporated decoupage into my crafting, I've had this little problem of not being able to look away from the napkin section in any store. So I actually made a separate trip to Dollar Tree this season to check out their holiday themed napkins, and they had about 4 or 5 different designs, including this pretty poinsettia one that we're going to use to create a cute beaded riser. For this craft, I also found 2 wood rounds. These are about 8 inches across, and then started by painting them with a coat of white paint. You could use acrylic paint or chalky paint. It doesn't really matter. It's just to create a base coat. On top of that, we're now going to decoupage our napkin, and I'm going to use the iron-on technique. So for this, we apply a coat of Mod Podge. Once that Mod Podge is dry, we're going to place our napkin, which I've taken down to the single ply, right over top of that, and then use my heat iron to iron the napkin onto the surface. So simply place a piece of parchment paper so that your iron doesn't stick and rip the napkin, and then go over that on low to medium heat for a couple of seconds. This then helps to fuse that napkin right onto the coat of Mod Podge that you've placed on there. Now we're going to sandwich some wood beads between the 2 wood rounds that we have for this project. You'll need either 2 packages of the wood beads. I think there's about 24 in each package, but I also found at the end of the season this fall garland that had 3 times as many of the wood beads as I would have gotten in one package. So I actually took that and cut it up. There was only the one left, but it provided more than enough beads for this particular craft. I strung them all onto a little bit of wire. You'll need enough to go around the entire perimeter of your wood round. If you don't have a wire, you can also use twine. This just really helps to hold everything together so that we can next glue them in place. Once you have enough beads on there to go all the way around the surface, we're going to flip over the top part where we had to decoupage that napkin, and then glue these beads all around underneath. And this will create a really nice decorative edge for our decorative riser. I'm just taking my time and slowly going around, adding glue little sections at a time. The wood beads are just such a fun way to add a special touch to the craft. It gives it that kind of farmhouse vibe, but I don't know, I just really like that texture, and you can choose whether to paint them or leave them natural. I'm going to leave these ones natural, but we will add a little bit of gold onto them. And I did a similar riser using this technique for our fall Dollar Tree video, which you can go back and see, because even though they're fall themed crafts, a lot of the techniques you could also apply to make some Christmas crafts. Once our ring of wood beads are secured onto the one round, we're going to just add a bead of glue all the way around the top of them and then place on the second round. So this is what I meant by you can sandwich those wood beads in between the two rounds and just line them up. And look how pretty this looks. It looks really fancy with just some Dollar Tree supplies. So we're going to add one more little touch to this, and that is some glue dots around that outer edge to create a bit of a decorative kind of riveted effect, which will really come out later when we put the gold metallic paint. This takes a little bit of time, but it's pretty satisfying. You'll just drop a little bit of glue on there and then lift the glue gun straight up. You can even wiggle it around a bit so that the string melts or disappears, and then it'll settle into these beautiful little circles all the way around. Once those are completely set, you want to leave them for maybe 10-15 minutes for the glue to cool and harden. I just flipped it over and added 3 more larger wood beads onto the bottom to create little feet for the riser. Now we're almost done. It's beautiful as it is. You could leave it here, but I wanted to add a layer of sealer on there just to protect the surface. So this is the Duraclear satin varnish. You could use Mod Podge or any other type of varnish that you have to protect, especially if you're planning to put items on here. You know, if it got wet, the napkin would get wrecked or scratched. So I find the Duraclear is a great way to protect that surface. Once that was dried, I used some of this gold metallic luster to really touch up those raised surfaces, and you could use, this is similar to Rub and Buff. This particular product is from Decor. I think it's called 24 karat, and you just use a little bit of it. It's almost like a paste that you can use for your crafting, and I'm just going to rub that over the surface of the little glue dots as well as all around that outer edge, including the wood beads, and then again a little bit along the outer edges of my feet. And that's our festive decorative riser with Dollar Tree supplies, including a pretty poinsettia napkin, and you can use this to display other Christmas themed crafts and decor. When I spotted these wood bead rings at my Dollarama, I quickly snapped up 3 of them to create a beautiful Christmas themed centerpiece. If you can't find the beaded rings, you could also use an embroidery hoop, or even make this on a larger scale with a hula hoop to have an arrangement that you could hang outdoors. But I started by basically slotting these 3 rings together to create sort of an orb shape. So you want to just squish them and wiggle them in there until they're evenly spread out. And then to hold it together, we are going to use just a little bit of wire to secure the top and bottom sections to each other. Don't worry if they're not perfectly fanned out, because we'll still be able to reposition them as we go. For the base, we're going to use this little plate from a terracotta pot that I had also from the Dollar Tree. You could use a small bowl or little dish, anything that will sort of hold the orb in place and give it a little bit of weight. I then use that same wire to affix my wood beads to that base plate. And then I cut up a styrofoam ball. I just basically took off a little bit from the bottom so that it would sit flat over the base of the beads and my base plate. And so you can see that it's just, you could even carve out a little bit in the center if that helps it to sit flat. But basically this is where we're going to be placing our florals into to make the arrangement. I next used a generous amount of hot glue, put it all over the beads at the bottom, and then placed that styrofoam ball right on there. And then I just started adding all my florals in. I started with some of the larger flowers that I just pulled off of the stems and shoved them right into the styrofoam ball. I actually later realized if I used the back of a paintbrush or my scissors to create a little hole, it makes it much easier. Then I could just put my glue right onto the flower and then tuck that into the little hole. And I just continued going all the way around the styrofoam ball to try to fill up and cover as much of it as possible. I used about 3 different kinds of florals, including a couple of these big magnolia flowers and these different shades of pink poinsettias, all from the Dollar Tree. These were actually all the same florals that I had used for the luminary craft earlier in this video, and I just love this color palette. It's such a nice change for Christmas from those reds and greens to have these pretty pinks and dusty roses. I had a couple stems of these leaves, including a darker eucalyptus one, and then added in there some of these rose gold mini ornaments. I'm so excited to share this next craft idea, which was inspired by one of our really popular crafts from last year. We're going to make miniature potted poinsettias using masking tape. This makes such a fun girls' night craft or craft for teens and a wonderful gift to give. For this craft, we need some 18 gauge wire as well as some 1-inch wide masking tape or painter's tape. You can use either. We're going to be painting it later. After cutting the wires to about 6 inches in length, you're going to take off strips of tape just long enough to fold over onto themselves, and this will create one petal of our poinsettia. We're going to repeat that until we have 5 of the larger petals, and then make 5 smaller ones. You could either use a narrower type of masking tape or simply cut 1.5-inch tape to a little bit narrower size. Once we have those 10 pieces cut out and mounted onto the wire, we can paint them. And I like to use this red from the dollar store. It's, I think, Decor Christmas red, actually. And we'll just paint the one side of our petals in this bright red color. Next, you can add a drop of black paint to that red just to darken it up a bit, and then paint the other side of each of those petals. If you think about a poinsettia flower, it usually has one lighter color on one side and a darker on the opposite side. Once our petal pieces are all painted and dry, we can start to cut them out. This doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to have them be a little bit pointed on the tips and then wavy along the sides and coming to a taper end at the base. They almost should have like the shape of a feather. And you could actually use this same technique to craft feathers for different projects. Maybe that's something that we can try in the future. I'm going to continue cutting these out until all 10 of our petals, or however many we've cut out, are done. And next we're going to add some details. I love to use this fan brush to add these sort of veins that are on the petals of the poinsettias. And so I'm dipping it into a little bit of green paint as well as the red paint, kind of blending them together to create a darker shade of red, and then rubbing that along both the stem as well as at an angle up the petal itself. Did you know that the red of the poinsettia plant are actually not flowers but leaves called bracts? And these bracts come in many different colors, and that they're created through a process where they need at least 14 hours of darkness for a 6 to 8 period in order to change color. I thought that was so cool. After painting on the darker shade, I actually went back over with a little bit of the red and white paint dipped together to add even more dimension and texture to the petals. I repeated this process with 4 pieces for some green leaves, painting them with a shade of green that was also blended with a little bit of that red to kind of make it darker. Okay, so now that we have all those pieces painted, it's time to form our plant. I started with the smaller pieces for the center and basically just folded that wire stem backwards and gathered each of the stems together, fanning them out as evenly as possible. The nice thing about using the wire for this is that you can then kind of bend and form the petals to create different shapes and textures versus using just some paper, for example. You can see here we're layering in those larger petals on the outsides, and then finally we'll tuck in some of those green leaves along the bottom. At this point, if you're finding that some of the petals or leaves look a little bit off, you can trim them. And then the last step is just to wrap all those stems together with a little bit more tape. I have some green painter's tape here, or else you can also just paint your yellow tape with some of the same color of green as was used for the leaves. You can just trim your stems to size, and then you place it into a small pot. We're using a little miniature clay pot that was painted green. We're going to make a quick craft with this chalkboard house I picked up at Dollar Tree. I simply used this chalk couture stencil with a white chalk paste to add on this really cute design, and then styled it with some other holiday elements. These bamboo cutting boards from Dollarama are one of our favorite surfaces to create beautiful signs and decor for different seasons. I started by painting the entire surface with a coat of white chalky paint. You could also use a white acrylic paint for this. We're going to be doing some decoupage and other embellishments, so this is just a great way to create a base coat for the rest of the project. As the paint was drying, we're going to prepare our napkin for decoupage. I started by cutting it down to size, and then I used my water pen to tear the napkin along the middle just so that the two halves would blend better together. It just seemed a little bit odd that the baubles were facing in opposite directions, and I wanted them all to hang in the proper direction. So once I had my napkins torn apart, I applied a coat of Mod Podge to the surface and then let that dry. I placed the first half of the napkin on the bottom of the board and then ironed it on by covering it with a piece of parchment paper and then running my heat iron right over that. I repeated that process with another section of the napkin until my entire board was covered and decoupaged. I used a sanding block just to sand off the excess bits around the edge of the cutting board, and then set to add some embellishments. So I used a little bit of gold leaf to add a gold touch to the caps of the ornaments by brushing on a little Mod Podge, letting it get tacky, and then placing the gold leaf over that. I let that dry for a while before brushing off the excess. I picked up this 3-inch wide ribbon from, I believe it was Michael's on clearance last year, and used that to make just a simple single looped bow for the top of the sign. My favorite way to make these bows is just to pinch all the pieces together at the center and then use a little bit of craft wire to hold it all together. The final touch for our festive project was to create a little sign Using a small wood chalkboard that I had, I painted it over with some white paint first and then did a crackle effect with some red paint on top to give it this beautiful texture. I then painted around the border with some gold metallic paint and used that same paint to letter the word joy onto the front of the sign. After gluing the mini joy sign to the bottom of the paddle, my festive piece of decor was all done. I think this is so beautiful. I actually gifted it to a friend for Christmas, but you could also make these to sell at a Christmas fair or craft show. If you're a gingerbread fan, you'll love this cute craft idea using some wood birdhouses from Dollar Tree. I started by painting my birdhouses with a brown acrylic paint. We're going to be making a pick for an outdoor planter, although you could use this same idea to make little gingerbread houses as ornaments for your tree or for indoor decor. So after painting the house with a dark brown color, I'm using a flat brush to brush on or tap on a little bit of a lighter brown color, and this just gives it that cookie texture effect. And now we're just going to use some white acrylic paint to add some details. Think lines and swirls and dots to give it that nice gingerbread house vibe. Before painting my houses, I had actually drilled a couple of holes, one here through the roof and then one through the bottom, that I could skewer through there a large dowel to create my outdoor planter pick. To add some icy sparkle to the roofs of our little houses, I brushed on some Mod Podge and then sprinkled it with diamond dust, tapping off the excess. When I have these outside, these sparkle so nicely in the sunlight. I wanted to continue the sweets theme of this craft, so I first painted a wood slice with some white paint and then added on red swirls to create a cute lollipop effect. I then painted a large wood bead white and added on some green stripes, which I next covered in diamond dust to create some candies. Now it was time to put all those pieces together. I added on some cute little bows from Dollar Tree ribbons and then slid on that wood slice at the top so that it looks like a lollipop. I used a little bit of glue throughout just to hold everything in place and keep it from shifting too much. And then continued, added in the gingerbread house and some more wood bead candies and bows. Now my almost sweet enough to eat craft is all done. I made a couple of them and tucked them in with some greenery in my front porch planters.
Christmas memories. I've been working so much lately, I can barely find the time to sleep. Yeah, I spend my time running around, keeping people.
We're actually going to use some wood cutouts from Halloween for this cute Dollar Tree craft. I painted a ghost with some white acrylic paint and one of the witch's hats with some red acrylic paint. I added on some cotton balls for the rim of the hat and the tip of the hat, painted on a little face, added a wood bead nose, and then simply placed that on a little dowel. Now I have this cute embellishment that I can add to planters and other arrangements for Christmas. For our next festive craft, we're going to give this little sign a makeover. I did one side Halloween themed, and then now we're going to do this side Christmas themed. I painted it all white first and then put on a coat of Mod Podge because we're going to do a little bit of decoupage. I love projects like this where I can use several different of the napkins that I have in my collection. Maybe it gives me a little justification for buying more, but you can't blame a girl for liking these little pieces of art. So I picked 3 sort of red and green themed napkins and decoupaged each one of them onto a different round from this hanger. So I did the iron-on method to press that in place. I simply sanded off the excess with a little sanding block, which helps you get a nice crisp edge. I next rubbed on some gold metallic luster paint around the edges and sides of each of the little wood rounds. and then created some embellishments. I was really thinking like mixed media or sort of a scrapbooking type of effect for this craft. I painted some of these little wood cutouts that I think also came from Dollar Tree with gold metallic paint, and then glued one onto each of the rounds. I added other embellishments like this beaded ribbon just to add a bit of texture. And finally, just some red faux berries. This was just a fun makeover of an item from the Dollar Tree that otherwise I would probably not have picked up, and you can have it hanging on the door or wall or anywhere that you need a little festive touch. If glitter's not your friend, you might want to pass up this Dollar Tree craft idea. We're going to be using some red and black and gold glitter, as well as a glass jar. Again, this jar you could take out of the recycling bin or find something similar at Dollar Tree or any dollar store. So we're going to start by cutting out from masking tape a rectangular shape. This will be the buckle of our Santa belt because we're making a glittering Santa themed jar. Next, we're going to use the masking tape to mask off 2 about 1 inch wide strips for the belt of the Santa pants. Since I didn't have any black glitter, I decided to paint the belt section with some black chalky finish paint. You could use an acrylic paint as well. And then we're going to put a clear glitter over that. So that should give us the same kind of effect. I'd sort of rushed this and painted just 1 coat, but in retrospect, it would have looked much nicer with 2 coats of paint to get a nice full coverage. Once the paint was dry, I applied a coat of Mod Podge evenly as possible around the whole thing. And while the Mod Podge was still wet, I rolled the jar in my diamond dust to give it a coating, a nice glittery coating. Once I was happy with the glitter placement, I removed the masking tape from the bottom as well as the top. And look how nice and crisp that line is. I did also go in and paint the black inside the buckle area, which I had forgot to do originally. Next, it was time to add the red glitter. So again, I applied a generous amount of Mod Podge onto the jar and then brushed it, just being careful not to go over that black line that I had painted before. And while that Mod Podge was still wet, I rolled my jar into some red glitter. And just takes a little bit of time, but it was really satisfying to see it covering my jar so nicely. I continued this process until the entire bottom of the jar was covered in the red glitter, and then repeated the application of the Mod Podge to the top half of the jar, but this part was a little difficult to roll in the glitter, so instead I sprinkled it on. I actually think this method worked even better because it provided like a thicker coverage of the glitter versus rolling it. So yes, if you're looking for making a glittery mess, this is the craft for you. I repeated the glittering process with a gold glitter around the buckle and added a little bit of baker's twine and some bells. This crafted a beautiful vase that I then filled with some greenery and other embellishments for a festive centerpiece. If you see these silver chargers at the dollar store or thrift store, be sure to grab them for some crafting fun. I decided to use this lovely winterscape napkin for this particular craft. And I used my water pen to trace around the evergreen trees on the design and then cut the rest of the napkin to just fit in the bottom half of the charger. I used some of my Decor Decoupaged glue and position that in place. It doesn't take a lot. You just need a little bit of the glue down on your surface and then place the tissue over top. And I folded the areas that I hadn't yet glued down because I didn't really want it to be overlapping too much. I didn't want the glue on the uncovered area of my charger plate because you can see it's quite reflective and I wanted to keep it that way. This particular napkin also had a pair of deer that I just couldn't resist including on the design, so I separated them out and then glued them onto the winter scene. Next, I used a bit more of the decoupage glue and put that on the branches of the trees, and then sprinkled them with some diamond dust to give it a little bit of snowy sparkle. I added a really pretty wired gray ribbon with red berries. I just made a simple double bow with that and then glued that onto the top center of the plate. I added in a little bit of greenery, some red berries, and then just a few little silver bells. And I absolutely love how this piece turned out. Not only is it a beautiful gift for the holidays, but it's actually a lovely piece of decor for the whole winter through.
It's a chance to start over new.
You can use any cute napkin to craft these adorable place card holders. I started by painting some medium-sized stones with some white paint and then coated it with a coat of Mod Podge, which I dried. Once dry, I put my napkin over top and ironed that with my little mini iron. I cut the napkin to size and then secured the edges down with a bit more Mod Podge. Now you'll want to wrap a wire, probably an 18 or 20 gauge wire, around there and then create a little loop. And you can simply tuck in your place cards into this loop for a unique tablescape idea. We're using this dollar store wooden star. I started by painting it a coat of red first, let that dry, and then covered that with some Elmer's glue, spread that around. And while it was still wet, I kind of dried it with my heat tool for about 10 seconds, but not too dry because you need the glue to still be quite tacky and wet for the crackle to form. I then added on a layer of my white paint. It happened to be a white chalky paint, but you could also use a white acrylic paint. Now, while this either air dries or you can use a tool such as our heat tool, as the paint dries, it creates this really lovely crackle. After the surface was ready, it was time to embellish, and I used the same technique with my water pen to trace around this snowman and then glued him onto the star right in the center. I used a little bit of the Decoupaged glue on my brush and just put a thin layer and then pasted that snowman right on there. After placing on the snowman, I simply added this cute buffalo check ribbon, a little bit of greenery, and some of these red sola wood flowers. Finally, to give it a little bling, I added on some of these jewels that I'd picked up off of Amazon to finish this adorable Christmas decor. I grabbed several different sizes of these terracotta pots to craft some Scandinavian-inspired Christmas trees. I started by gluing a few of them together. For the larger tree, I used 3 pots and 2 pots for the smaller sized trees. Next, I painted my larger tree with some white chalky finish paint, and this provides really great coverage on terracotta. And the medium-sized tree, I painted red, this beautiful rich red color, also a chalky finish paint by Decor. And then finally, the smallest one, I also painted white. To add on the details, I first tried to use a paint pen, but it just wasn't getting a thick enough line for me. So instead, I used a fine paintbrush and my chalky finish paint to add all these details. And so I added some scallops, stripes, dots, any kind of repetitive motif to add those details all around the trees. For the red tree, I created simple leaf shapes by first creating a curved line and then adding little leaves. And then for the smallest tree, I was able to use a gold paint marker to add some snowflake designs. Finally, I painted some gold stars to top off each of the trees. This beautiful little red and white forest turned out so well. I'm really excited to make some more. If I spot these wood artist panels at Dollar Tree, I always make sure to pick up a few of them because they're so versatile for crafting. I originally thought about and tried to stain this with a brown faux stain, but it turned out just looking too orange and not right. So I painted over it with some black acrylic paint, and I think it just added that nice pop or bold color for this craft. The black paint also coordinated really well with this black vinyl that I used for cutting out this Merry and Bright phrase. It's a Cricut Design Space file, and I'll be sure to link the project in the description below. Once all the extra little pieces were weeded out, I transferred the design to a little bit of transfer tape and then transferred that onto some adhesive cardstock. I had already cut out the cardstock to size so that it fit nicely around my sign. I set that aside for a moment and then went back to my artist's panel to decoupage this pretty poinsettia napkin onto the back. I just cut that down to size, applied a coat of Mod Podge to the back of the panel, and then placed the napkin into the position. In retrospect, I should have painted the inside of the panel with some white paint because you can sort of see the yellow peeking through, but we are going to be putting the phrase over top, so it won't be as noticeable in any case. I did feel that the design wasn't quite poinsettia enough, so I cut out another piece of the napkin and layered that on top. This is a great way to take napkins and actually make them more custom and one of a kind. So after sealing that up with another layer of Mod Podge, I let that dry and then placed my little sign over top. I hid all those little imperfections around the border with some baker's twine glued into the ridges, and finally added on a few embellishments to the top left corner, including some greenery, berries, frosted pine cones, and a little red and white ribbon.
Christmas memories, oh, and I've been longing to hold you close. Forget about everyone else. Isn't this how it's supposed to?
For this next craft, you can either get some glass jars from the Dollar Tree or simply turn to your recycling bin. I grabbed this jar that I had taken the labels off and made sure it was clean, and then painted it with a coat of chalky finish paint. I then cut out a few of the cardinals from this really lovely holiday themed napkin. We have a bunch of these in our Christmas napkin bundle in the shop, which I'll link below. I thought that the scissors actually made the edge a little too sharp, so instead used a paintbrush dipped in water to wet the tissue and then tore it to create this pretty frayed edge. Next, we'll simply glue those onto the jar using a little bit of Mod Podge. I like to place my piece down on the jar and then lift up half of it so that I can hold the other half in place while I'm gluing it down one half at a time. And this works really well. You can brush over the Mod Podged napkin just to seal it in place. The thing that makes this craft extra special is dressing up the lid. So I started by spray painting it a really beautiful cherry red color, and then added on this crystal cabinet knob that I picked up a bunch of them off of Amazon. Again, I will link that below so you can get your own if you'd like these, and simply screwed that in there. So doesn't that really just give this an elevated touch, that little bit of bling? I finished this off with some red baker's twine and little Christmas charms. You could also make them with twine and a wood knob for the top. These are great to hold gifts and treats or just as decor. Don't pass by the kitchenware section when you're looking for craft supplies at the Dollar Tree. I picked up some of these wooden spoons to make cute little wall hangers. I started by painting them with my white paint and then used a gold metallic paint to add on little phrases like peace, love, joy, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, or even just jingle bells all the way. I cut a piece of a pretty festive napkin to fit around the handle and then decoupaged on that with a bit of Mod Podge, cutting off the excess. You can then seal everything in with another coat of Mod Podge over top. Now it's time to add some embellishments. I strung some cute metallic charms and little bells around a bit of wire and then tied that to the wooden spoon. I then added on some green holly leaf stems, a little gold bow, and some more red and green bells. And that's it. I've got a really cute little gift that I can stuff in a stocking or a basket or hang on my wall. This is such a cute craft. You can use either jumbo craft sticks as we've done here, or use regular size popsicle sticks for a smaller version. We're going to paint several of these jumbo popsicle sticks in 2 different shades of a color of your choice. I used green, and then glue 4 of them side by side, with the 2 in the middle being slightly longer than the bottom 2. You'll want the bottom edge to be flat all the way across, and then glue 2 full-length craft sticks to create the sleds. After cutting 1 more piece to size and gluing it diagonally across the back, you've made your adorable little sled. You can add on some twine for a hanger and then dress it up with a bit of faux greenery, some buttons, pine cones, whatever you have to give it that festive touch. This makes just a really cute ornament for the tree or a piece of decor for your shelf. I hope you've enjoyed all these ideas so far. We have full-length tutorials still to make these coffee filter angels. We also have a tutorial to make a beautiful angel with clothespins, as well as this Christmas busted canvas craft. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed all of these ideas, and let us know in the comments below which was your favorite. If you liked what you've seen in today's video, be sure to subscribe for future creative DIY and craft ideas. Happy crafting!